Okay, so has anyone here worked with hypothesis before?
No.
Okay, well, there's two ways in which you can use hypothesis, but before we do that, if you'd like to grab these slides, there may be some useful information there. You can either grab the link. Let me see if I can copy it, and I'll drop it into the chat, or you can type it in, or you could aim your camera at the slides, and it should give you the option of this of making a copy of this. It will copy right into whatever Google Drive account you're logged into, if you know, and that way you can delete things, modify it, or do anything you like with it afterwards. Okay, everyone get that? Okay. So first, maybe we should just do a quick round of introductions because I suspect not everyone knows everyone here. I'm John Kane. I'm the director of the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching here, and also an economist. Um, and if you would like to,
Yeah, I'm Aria Drager. I am an assistant professor of meteorology, and I have not used hypothesis.
and Ebru,
Yes, my name is Ibra Altay Damkasi. I teach in the English department and I haven't used hypothesis before.
okay, and Michael,
I am Michael Hurley. I'm from the math department. I have not used hypothesis either.
okay, and Jinyan.
I'm Jingye. I'm a faculty from biology. I have not used hypothesis before.
Okay, now there's two ways. Well, there's at least two broad ways of using hypothesis. One is to have students get their own accounts, and then you create a class group and you use it outside of Brightspace. And in that case, students can go out and find things and share it and share annotations with the group. And that could be really useful if you're sending the students out online to annotate material or to find material that they might be annotating. Another way of using it is in Brightspace, and I've used both ways, but most often now I'm using Hypothesis in Brightspace. The difference is you don't have to have students creating their own accounts. It's automatically created for them, and it's all kept within the LMS, all within Brightspace. The only limitation there, though, is that only you can post the materials for the students to read and to annotate. They can't do that unless they submit something to you and then you post it for them. So, which of those seems might be of more interest? Well, I suppose we should talk first about what Hypothesis does. Basically, students can annotate web pages, they can annotate text materials, PDFs, or well, pretty much only text materials or websites out there by embedding comments right in the material itself that can be seen by anyone either in the group if you're using the individual accounts or the public accounts, or by anyone in the class if you're using it in class. Which we can go through both, but it's probably more efficient if we focus on one or the other. Any preferences?
I think I'm more interested in like students annotating each other's work, so that would be the group one.
It doesn't have to
Oh,
be.
it does?
In fact, one of the ways I've used it is to have students annotate other students' work. And by what I have them do, well, they've been working in groups in my class, in the capstone class in economics, where they work on a chapter of something. They write a chapter of a book, for example, and at a certain stages when a certain draft is needed, for example, if they're doing a review of literature, I freeze those, save them as a PDF. I have them work in Google Drive since they're working as groups, but then I freeze it as a PDF and upload it, and then each group annotates the others. And I had tried doing it right in Google Drive, and that was kind of a disaster because as soon as students had annotate or had comments posted, students would go in and correct the material and delete the annotation, which made it hard to track all of that. But this way, it froze the work at a certain time in the semester, and then everyone could comment on that at that stage, and students could see the feedback, and I could see what feedback they were providing and so forth. So that's probably still best done within the class, because that way one of the problems I had when students were using the free version or the public version of Hypothesis was that the advantage was they could go out and find resources and annotate and share it with their class. But you could also do that by having a form where they'd upload links, and then if you found it useful, you could share it, or you could do that in general. But the problem is when students are using, a problem I run into at least was when students were using the public version, they have options of saving things for their own use, for public use, or for a group use. And if they did not save it for the group use, it was not visible to the other students. So students were finding things and then saving it as a public annotation, which again was not shared with the group. So no one knew they had done that, or they were sharing it just for themselves. And in theory, that probably would have been resolved, within 2 or 3 iterations, but it was a real pain reminding students to do this each time because it was a really common mistake for students to make. In Brightspace, they have 2 options, but the default is always to share their comments with the whole class or with the group that they're in if they're working in a group. So for annotations of other students' work or to, provide feedback on each other, I'd probably still recommend the Brightspace. Plus, it creates great book columns and it's all integrated into Brightspace. Because if it's external, students can always make changes and that makes it really messy. Anyone else have a preference?
My preference is in Brightspace, especially for an online asynchronous course that I'm teaching. I'm going to be having, lecture notes in there that I would prefer students be able to annotate or make notes on as they read through it, or if they want to refer to it later, either to themselves or to me or to fellow students.
Okay, so let's focus on the Brightspace one. I'll mention the other, and there's a couple of slides on there. It's a web annotation tool. You embed discussions within a document. And the annotations, though, as I mentioned, public, private, or restricted to a group. If you do it within Brightspace, they're either private or restricted to a group, but the default is to keep it to the class group or to a subgroup if you use group assignments in class. In either case, though, whether it's a standalone account or within a class, users could generate tags that could be used to curate materials so that they could use it to classify articles they're reading or comments or types of feedback. For example, if you're asking students to provide a critical analysis, or if you're asking them to whatever is relevant within your class, they could flag certain types of things. So they could flag some things as evidence, some things as arguments, or some things that are whatever is relevant within your class. And you can use it again, either to curate certain types of documents and materials or paragraphs or parts of an article or reading, etc., or again, for some type of analysis. So again, this is pretty much what you would do if you were doing it outside of Brightspace. And these are common ways in which people use it. But some of these will work within Brightspace as well. So the only thing you can't really do if you are using it within Brightspace is directly have students gather resources that they share. But everything else can still work. One of the things that we all have complained about, I suspect, I know I have at times, is that when I gave students reading assignments, they often didn't do all those readings, just as sometimes when I've been given reading assignments, I didn't do all the readings in advance either, or for meetings, etc. And one of the nice things about having them annotate right within the document is they kind of have to read at least parts of the document to be able to annotate. So they're doing it directly in the documents. It's also a little bit less vulnerable to AI because if they're already in the document and they're asked to provide feedback or comments on it, they're more, it's easier for them just to put their own individual reactions than to upload the document to AI, ask questions, and then paste them into the comments. So it's actually easier for them to do the work in the document than it would be, sorry, to have them do it outside. And I need something to drink here. One way in which people have used it is to also as an alternative to discussion forums. One of the things I've often done in my online classes is given students some readings to do, and then they would comment on the readings. But those comments were often, again, fairly superficial, and it wasn't always clear that students were doing the readings before the comments, before they made the comments. But again, once they're in there, they are more likely to actually do it as a basis for that. And it's a threaded discussion forum because they can comment on each other's comments. And the comments could be, and I think this is covered later, but they could use text comments, they could upload audio, they could upload short videos as part of their annotation. And it's a good way to get students reading primary sources. They're doing some collaborative learning right within it. And also it can be really useful as a way of providing peer feedback. And that's especially true if you're doing open pedagogy projects, which could be things that the students are creating, or it could be, there's been a lot of open pedagogy projects where people have gone out and created anthologies of readings. One of the first big one was done by Robin DeRosa, where she was noting she was teaching English classes, American literature, I think it was, and she noted that students were paying $60, $70 for an anthology of literature, but pretty much all of the studies in it were in the public domain already because it was early American literature, I believe. And what she noted was that instead of having students pay for this, she could have them do the annotations because the main reason to pay for the anthology was it was all together in one place and it was annotated. But she said, maybe the students could learn just as much by annotating these readings themselves and creating their own book where they're doing annotations. But you could also have students write papers or, anthologies or you could have them write, their own research projects as things that are shared publicly. Okay, so we're going to skip over the free account. This is how to do it. I had done that last year. I didn't even create a new group, but this is how you use Hypothesis outside. And some people use it just as a way of saving resources and annotating it, as an alternative to any of the other collection type apps. So, well, yeah, let's skip over this, and if we have time, we can come back to this. Let's focus more about, well, actually, let's try this. Let's jump over to Brightspace, and I'm going to log in myself. If you could log into Brightspace for just a second, for a few minutes, let's go there. And I do have a little some workshop materials in the SELP website here. And I'll share that in just a second as soon as I get there. Okay, so if you log into Brightspace, you should all have access to one of the terms is listed as what was it? Let's go back for a second. It's kind of automatic for me, so I don't think about it that much. It's listed as no term because it doesn't end with a given term. And apparently I've got some other things I've got to do there. Okay, but in any case, hop into the CELT group and then scroll down. Well, you should see right near the top there a hypothesis workshop. And these were just a few links I put in, I think last year when we did this. Here's some articles. And I want to show you how to upload something to Brightspace. is there any sort of study that you would like to comment on? And we can just go out and find it. Any, well, these are things that are already there. This is what it would look like from a student view, but let's go through the process of creating a new one. And I'm just going to grab something by Gary Becker. Let's say well, that's a book. We don't want the book. Investment in Human Capital. I've just done a really quick Google search, and I knew there'd be some things here. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to download the PDF. Well, let's just say I'm just going to put this in as a URL because I may not remember that number in a moment. So I've now saved it. Okay. So I have a PDF that I'd like students to look at. So what I'm going to do here is, and this is how you add things to Hypothesis. You go under existing activities, you scroll down until you see Hypothesis, and you could do the same thing with, if you have a reading or PDF on your um, in your course. And you can add things from a URL if they're already out on a website. You could add things that are already stored in your Brightspace files as PDFs. You could grab anything that's in Google Drive, anything on JSTOR, or any videos on YouTube, or anything in OneDrive if you're using Microsoft more. We're going to go with Google Drive because that's how you can upload things. Here, I've got two accounts on this one. I've got like 5 or 6 Gmail accounts. But what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to choose at the top, there is an option to upload something. And I'm going to select a file from my device, and I'm going to go over to Downloads. Oh, there it is. Becker. Okay. I'm sorry. I was blanking there for a second. And now it gives it a name. Let's say this is human capital. Now, what I normally would do if I'm uploading a research paper or whatever, a working paper, I would put in the full citation with the journal and all of that. The maximum number of points, you can set that at whatever point scale you're using. If you want to have a grade associated with it, you could set grading to be automatic, which is based on the number of things they post, or you could do it separately. I usually do it separately, especially when I have them doing peer review. But let's just say this is going to be 100 points, and it will create a column there. But I'm not going to make it automatic. It's just going to create a column for it. And now what's happened is there is now at the bottom of this a new article. And if you click on that, you will see the article. And I could ask students to annotate the article. And this is an old one, wasn't it? Okay. But basically what they would do is if there's something they want to comment on, they would just block the text. And I'm just randomly doing that, and I missed the letter F there. But what they would do then is they would choose annotate. Highlight is something that's just saved for their own use. But if they click annotate, now they can put in a comment. And the comments could be, well, it has the usual tools for boldface, italics, quote mode, or you could put a link to something. You could upload an image. You also have LaTeX tools there. So if you want to do some mathematical typing or scientific typing, you can put LaTeX right in there as part of your response. I'm not going to do that right now, but you could by just typing the standard LaTeX bulleted lists. And this is something where you could add to comments on people who are already there, and there we go. And then you could add tags and you could post to self. And by default, it does that. The other thing is only me, but it always defaults to the class group. And it's really as easy as that. And again, that's not a very useful comment. In fact, there's nothing there in the comment. I should have said something. So let me edit that. Let's just say this is a comment. I'm not feeling very clever there. So I'm going to post that. And now if anyone wanted to respond to that, they would see that there in the height, when you're reading it, if you click on that, it will show you the comment, and then you could respond by using the reply thing. And it's really intuitive and really easy for students to understand. And they generally find it really interesting and engaging and kind of fun because they get to interact right in the document itself. Um, and as they read through it, they can leave questions, they could post comments, they could react in whatever ways you ask them to react. And and there it is. And
John, I have a
yes,
quick question.
sure.
To go to their own notes, is that page notes? Do they need to click the page notes to see just their own notes for
Okay,
themselves?
no, that's different. The page notes are if you want to leave a comment on the whole page. So if you want to leave a notation about the whole article or the whole document, you would leave it there. So that would show up as a notation for the document, not an annotation. So, for example, if you were using this individually, outside of Hypothesis, outside of Brightspace, you might want to put in a paragraph summarizing what the study is about or what you found interesting there. And then when you click on the article, it would show you the page notes. And the page notes would show up, but if I remember, they show up right at the actually, they're just listed as part of the document. So if we put in a page note, it would be available and it would show you the number of page notes there, and then you could click through it. So you could ask students to write a summary of the whole thing that wasn't tied to specific text, and that would be done as a page note. You see?
Yeah. But how about if they want to switch to their own notes? How do they do that?
The own notes, what would happen is when they load the document, they would be able to see that. So let's say I want to put in a note just for me. Let's say I want to put in a note for this thing, whatever that sentence fragment is. So I would click annotate and I would put this is a private comment. And I would then say, post this to only me. So I would see that it would be shaded as a different color, which would be my notes that only I would see. The instructor wouldn't see that, nor would other students.
Okay, so they're all on the same spot. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes. So everyone is using the same document and they'd see their own notes in a different color. It may be green for everyone, I'm not sure. But everyone will see the yellow comments that were posted to the group. You will only see the ones that are posted for you. Oops, it changed it to yellow. So I guess it still shows up as yellow. Never mind. But I can see this. Other people won't be able to see those notes. And again, this was a private comment. Let me fix that. So there. Okay. I've had enough typos today. But it's kind of interesting, and it's kind of interesting to get to see what students are taking out of this. So when you give them an article to read, they can ask questions saying, I don't quite understand this, or I disagree with this, or they could post responses. And when I have them read through an article, I generally ask them to post, I think, at least 3 on each of the articles they're assigned that week. And some of the students will post 7 or 8 or 10 or 12, which is much more than they normally would do in a discussion board. And again, it does get them to read it in ways that I found they generally didn't if it was not assessed in some way. So, and you saw how easy it was to add. Basically, you just go there, go to external tools, and yeah, let's go back again. Let's go back to the workshop there. And now you've added a new document and hypothesis. These were all ones we added last year in the workshop. So, and by the way, many of these were interesting studies. With a YouTube example, what happens is that it will let you annotate, if there's a transcript with it, it will let you annotate the transcript. So it doesn't annotate the audio directly, but it will show you what the comments were that people were making, and you could play through it. I'm not sharing the audio, so that wouldn't quite work. But it will, when you play it through, it will show you the comments that were popped up at specific locations there. So you can comment on the text and then annotate it and do that. So that will work with audio files or with video files for which there's a transcript, which of course all should have transcripts with them, especially in academic institutions. So, but again, if you just want to put some summary notes, you would just go up here. Where is that? I think it would be, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, one more time. I'm trying to remember where you post.
It's where your cursor is right now.
Oh, right. Yes. So if you want to create a new one, you just click on the thing that has the new page notes. And, so if you want students to do some sort of a summary or evaluation of something, but not annotate specific things, they can do it right there. That's also useful, by the way, if you share a link to an image, because there's no text to annotate in an image, although it may very well use the image descriptions now. But in the past, there were a lot of images out there without descriptions. So there shouldn't be going forward under Title II, but that's another issue. Okay, so any questions on this?
Yeah. So when we were doing the thing on the other one, I was adding some replies just as
Okay.
it happened, and it looked like there's a little thing that popped up in the upper right as a note.
And it showed the number.
It showed the number of replies or number of updates, but it didn't show immediately what those responses were.
No, you have to go through and, well, there's a few ways of getting to it. Let me go back. There we go. Let me go back to here. What will happen is, and that's a really useful point. So, you either have to scroll through all of them, or what you can do is, if you're grading it, let's say, where for students, what you have the option of doing is either seeing all the comments, or you can see it for individual students. Right now, by default, it shows all the annotations by everyone, but we could find your comments right here.
Well, I was on the human capital page.
Oh, right, and I opened the wrong one. One more time. Sorry about that. But this is how it would, well, that's how it would work if I hadn't messed up. One more. Tomorrow will be better. It will. Okay, so let's try that again. The human capital one.
To the bottom.
You're right. And you can always drag and drop them like with anything else in Brightspace. So now if we go up to here, we could choose your comments because we're the only two people who have commented on this, and there it shows. So you could, if you're assigning grades, you could pick each student, look at what their contributions were, and then add it to a gradebook column. I normally just keep the gradebook column open separately, but you can also automate it where they automatically get graded based on the number of, of posts or whatever the other criteria is. I tend not to use the automatic criteria because, I want to evaluate them and give them some feedback on their posts, so that if they're really superficial type comments, I'll remind them that, they should provide a little bit more analysis or more commentary, or, add something more to the discussion of the article, for example. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, so it's really easy to do now, basically. You either get the URL if it's something that's already in one of those other it's on your drive, or if it's on, let me just close that out. There we go. Oops. Oh, that was there we go. One more time. So, yeah, the only disadvantage, and I know you have to go. See you later. The only disadvantage is only you can post the material, but you can set up groups, and it uses whatever groups you've already created. So if you create an assignment where you want students to post things in groups, if you have a large class, you might want to have them broken up into smaller groups where they're discussing it only with their peers. Or if you're doing some group projects, you can restrict it again, so each student will only be able to comment on whatever readings that group is assigned, for example. So let's go through a little bit more. I think we already talked about this. Yeah. And we kind of are, oh, another nice thing about doing it within Brightspace is it's a single sign-on. They don't have to create accounts. They don't have to remember logins. And it automatically creates a private class group that only exists within that course. So they don't have to keep track of multiple classes if they're using the multiple classes. It's all contained within the DLE. And from students' perspective, it's almost as if it's part of Brightspace. And that makes it just a little bit more intuitive because I know when students are given 3 or 4 different sites that they have to log into and jump to within a course, they find it a little bit fragmented and so forth. And they sometimes forget what the logins were, they forget which email to use when they logged in. And this way, they don't have to log into anything other than the Brightspace account they're already using. Again, that's the main restriction. Um, and again, you might want to create your own gradebook column and tie that to a rubric, etc. And we've kind of already talked about this a little bit. It's a great way of having students go out and look at these things, look at papers, look at websites, videos that have transcripts, podcasts, and so forth. Encourages close reading skills. And I already said it was easier to annotate and rely on AI. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about at least how I've done it with peer review, and I've already suggested that a little bit. I have students write draft chapters in a group Google Drive, and I create an account. I create a folder for the class and then a folder for each of the groups within that, and I share those permissions with everyone. And then I save at the due date when the drafts are all due. I save it and upload it as if there's 5 groups in the class, I upload 5 PDFs, label them with group 1 and whatever the title of their project is. And then students will view the feedback. Well, students will comment on whatever groups they've been assigned to provide feedback on. If I have 5 groups, I might have each group provide feedback on 2 or 3 of the other groups and rotate that around so they all get equal amounts of feedback. And then students will take that feedback and rewrite the drafts at the next iteration. And that just continues until it gets to the final stage of the project. Now, there is another tool we have, and in some ways, Perusal is another thing that works in a very similar way. One advantage of Perusal is it's free. Hypothesis, there's this cost. It's fairly low. It's just a couple of dollars per student that the campus has been picking up. But Perusal is free. But it's also perhaps a little bit slightly more complicated in some ways. Perusal is free because it works with publishers, where if a publisher puts their book in Perusal and creates it in a Perusal format, then they sell those books to students, basically. So you're buying a contract for the book through Perusal, and the publishers are essentially paying for Perusal for hosting their book on this platform. So if you have one of the books that's in Perusal format, students can directly annotate the book itself. And that's how they're getting the funding, basically. But the thing that makes Perusal perhaps a little bit less, from my perspective at least, a little bit less comfortable for students, because I have tried both, is that when they click on a link to Perusal, they end up with all their Perusal assignments separate from the rest of what's in Brightspace. So it does feel very much like the publisher's content, where when students click on it, they log into this whole new system that is then somehow integrated back into Brightspace. But it feels to them like they're leaving Brightspace to do this work. And then when they finish, they come back in and they can no longer see the work that they've been doing. What a lot of people tend to like about Hypothesis is that everything is embedded right there. and it also has the annotation of audio and video files. And in fact, it will do that as you're playing it and so forth. But now pretty much that works too. But again, the issue is that it's a somewhat standalone interface. You can log into it directly without ever going into the LMS and so forth. And well, so try either one of them. I think Hypothesis is a little bit easier. At some point, given our budget, we may be forced to move to just Perusal. But so far, for the last 7 or 8 years, we have had Hypothesis funded. So some other things you might consider doing with Hypothesis. One is you could post your syllabus and let students post questions on it. Or you could have students, or you could post a behavioral norm document or an AI use document, or any material in your class that students might have some questions about, or that you might want students to provide some feedback on. You could post that and let students respond to it, make suggestions for changes, and have other people comment on their suggestions. And or if you have your own textbook, or if you have an OER textbook, they could post questions and comments directly in the book that has been assigned. And then you can provide responses to them, or other students can provide responses to them. You could have students, annotate course content. And here's a few resources. There's a teacher's resource guide provided by Hypothesis. There's a student resource guide that you can share with students. Although, from a student perspective, it's pretty simple. They click on things, they highlight something, and they type or post an image or a video or something similar. And we did do a podcast with Maggie Smool, who is the associate director. She's on family leave this semester. But she talked about her responses to using it a while back. And I clicked on the wrong thing there. The next link is Liquid Margins, which is actually a podcast series, which is created by Hypothesis, or a video series. So that should be effective use cases. I think I messed up there. Sorry about that. And that's pretty much it. So, any questions? Is there anything you'd like demonstrated, or have you tried this in your own courses?
Hey, John, I have a question about books.
Mhm.
Like for books, you have to have a PDF file for each chapter and upload there, right?
Well, you could have a PDF for the whole book, or a PDF for each chapter, which technically you can really only do if it's an OER, if it's been released under, an open educational resource license, or, Creative Commons license of some sort.
Yeah, so other books, if it's only available in a digital version on Amazon, then I won't be able to have student annotated.
Um, Generally not. If it's only available through a publisher's ebook site where basically they're controlling access to it, generally you can't. Although many publishers do provide this as part of their package, with inclusive access packages. So some will include Hypothesis, some will include other capabilities similar to that if students are buying the book and getting an electronic delivery.
Oh, if the publisher embedded hypothesis, how the instructor can say how many, like how can we grade it from there?
That would depend on how they've
Yeah.
configured it, and many of them use their own annotation tools.
Mhm.
So, but if you're using OER materials, you could then have students use it. Or if the book is available online, or if you're using any resources online, we demonstrated this with PDFs, but it could also have been a website, so that if there's a study you're looking at, or if there is an online textbook that's, available as a website, you could have students annotate that too, where instead of uploading the PDF, you could just put a link to that. But I don't think Unless the publishers have enabled it or enabled the equivalent of this, I don't think you can do it with most publisher provided textbooks, electronically provided text.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. Thank you so much for the
You're welcome.
information.
Any other questions?
Will we
Does it?
continue to have access to the CELT page on Hypothesis
Yep.
on Brightspace?
Yes. So you could play with making annotations there. But if you open up any Brightspace course, you could always create a page that's not visible to students and just play with it to see what it looks like. And if it looks like something that might be worth trying, just give it to your students and let them try it. My students' feedback from it have been incredibly positive, both in terms of providing feedback on each other's work and in terms of providing feedback on the articles they're assigned to present every week. So, because one of the things I did is I have the class break up into groups where each week each group of students are presenting a paper in class. It's a 3-hour class. So, what was often happening is they'd only really read the papers that they were presenting and not the others. And this way, they have to at least do some reading on the others because they have to provide some comments in there. And it's led to so much better informed discussions because if they had only read their own papers, they couldn't really ask questions or comment on or react to the other papers. And by doing it this way, they all have read through at, at least that they have made some attempt to read through each of the articles because they've at least posted some questions or comments or reactions to it in the document.
Yeah, nowadays it's very hard to get students to read. Yeah, this is a good way to push them.
It works well, and it doesn't feel like you're forcing them that way to them. It feels like, oh, okay, we can just do it this way, which is easier than reading something and then going back into a discussion forum and trying to comment on it because they're commenting on it right in the context of the article, which, you know, is generally it's resulted in much better quality student responses than when I was using before this, I was using discussion forums. And it was pretty clear that some of the students at least, were not doing even a very superficial reading of the articles they were supposed to be commenting on. But it's harder to do that when the text is right there on the screen in front of you. And Michael, with LaTeX, it's easy for them to do math typing if you wanted them to. Although
Possibly, since I'm always getting complaints from students that they can't read my annotations for online assignments that they get back, or they can't annotate anything that they work on and turn in, or annotate back when I grade.
well, this is one way of doing it. You could provide your feedback there, and then they could provide feedback to your feedback or questions, if you wanted to do it that way. And you could even have groups of one if you wanted them to do it with individual assignments. But the social annotation is really the main benefit from this, that they get to see everyone else's comments and react to it. And one of the things I've done is when I've asked them to provide comments is I have two deadlines where they all have to post at least some reactions by that date, and then another one where all their annotations are due, because otherwise, if this was all due, let's say at noon on the day of the class meeting, what would often happen is there'd be a lot of posts all around like 11:30 or so, which makes it a lot harder to get other posts to react to. So, by giving them two deadlines where they have to have at least something posted in each of the files by this time, or there's some sort of grade penalty, it tended to have some initial posts for others to respond to. And it spread their work out a bit more than they might have done if that wasn't a condition. Okay, any questions or other comments, thoughts? No? Well, play with it and see how it goes. And I think you'll like it. I certainly have enjoyed it, and most people who've tried it has found it to be helpful. So I don't know of anyone who started using it and stopped. Okay, well, we'll stop the recording then, and I'll see you at some future sessions.
Thank
They
you,
start up
Kane.
again
Thank
tomorrow.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.